Hello everyone, my name is Gus.
Hi, I'm Woody.
Before we start today, I want to mention something that I noticed. I noticed that a lot of our subscribers are being like purged out of YouTube. I don't know why. It's like every day is like just keeps dropping and dropping. I don't think people all of a sudden got sick of us. But if you're watching this video, please check your subscription like details or status, I guess. If you're not subscribed to Dive Talk, please hit subscribe again, because YouTube does this every once in a while. They are like, if you don't watch the videos too much, they just take you out or something.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So yeah. And I've noticed several messages. People are like I was subscribed. Like, what happened? I didn't get notified, etc. So
Okay.
make sure subscribe, hit the bell, etc. But this video is an interesting one today because it was sent to us. I haven't seen it. You haven't seen it, but is I think it's titled like "Horrifying Scuba Accidents Caught on Camera" or something.
Well, we love that kind of stuff. So
We do.
in terms of reacting to it.
Right, exactly. So let's take a look and see.
All right.
Take a look at this video.
Okay.
For those of you just listening, it is a video of several divers swimming close together in deep green water. The water is fairly cloudy, and the divers are swimming along the top of some sort of structure, passing by these dark open windows. This was filmed in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Portugal at the site of a shipwreck.
Ooh.
As the divers swim around, you can see the ship start to take shape, and it's clearly been at the bottom for quite a while, based on the amount of growth on the deck and hull. Incredibly, although the weather that day above the surface was a sweltering 38 Celsius or 100 Fahrenheit, the temperature at 30 meters or 100 feet deep where this was filmed was just a few degrees above freezing. Cold enough that it would be like taking an ice bath if you weren't wearing a wetsuit. The person filming this video was named Callum, and at the time the video was taken, he was 17 years old on holiday with his parents from England. Both of Callum's parents were divers, and they'd often go on vacation on boats in the Red Sea, and a year earlier, Callum also started to learn to dive like his parents, and his dad took him to the island of Rhodes near Greece
Vertically
to
like
get training.
Well, this is
There, he learned basic PADI training in the clear, calm, and
it's
temperate
this
water
is basic
Mediterranean.
paddock training. That's
Hey.
After returning to
I
England,
mean-
he continued his training in freshwater lakes. They weren't as clear or as warm as where he first learned, but they were good enough to keep practicing. Now, around the time Callum was first learning, he was very lean. People who are very lean often have trouble with buoyancy because they lack the less dense fat mass to help them float. Because of this,
That's
Callum
true.
was basically neutrally buoyant in freshwater with a wetsuit on, and so he only needed a little 2-kilogram weight belt to help him sink.
okay.
This is sort of an unusually small amount of weight compared to most people. A little over a year later, he and his parents arrived in Portugal, where they had booked 2 days to go diving around the coast and see some shipwrecks. Then they took a boat from the coast out to the spot in the water where the ships were submerged and got suited up for their dive. By then, since it had been some time since Callum had dived, he was given a slightly heavier 6-kilogram weight belt to compensate for any weight gain and the slightly denser salt water. In addition to that, in the past, he was prone to feeling some of the effects of nitrogen in regular air, and for whatever reason, seemed to consume air more quickly than most people. So for this trip, he was going to be using a mixture known as nitrox. This gas is a slightly higher concentration of oxygen, which would hopefully
Okay.
prevent him from feeling
Are you
on one second.
confused
Hold
as
on,
I am
hold
right now
on.
on that?
Let's go back for a second. He was right in what he said that the air he was breathing has nitrogen. We've talked about that before on the show, where the air that we breathe only has 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen or so. And he said that because of that, he was feeling the effects of nitrogen. Well, all of us feels the effect of nitrogen because that's in the air that we breathe 24/7. So what? That's number one. But number two is like the effects of nitrogen was making them breathe super fast. No, actually to you, when you're diving, it doesn't really matter if you're diving with air or nitrox. Your air consumption is not affected by the kind of gas that you're breathing. And the main reason for this is that we don't use all of the oxygen that you breathe in the air. You know, when you breathe 21%, you're not using all of the oxygen. You're only using about 5% of those 21%. You're breathing out 16%. And that's why mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, for example, works, because the person can take enough oxygen from your breath for them to come back to life. Okay? So if you have, let's just say, a common nitrox mix, which is 32% oxygen instead of 21, you're not magically using 16%. What you're still using 5. You're still using the same amount. So when you're breathing out, you're probably going to breathe out like 27% oxygen or whatever it is. So your utilization of the air, your air consumption will not be affected by you breathing air versus nitrox versus 100% oxygen or whatever. Like, none of that stuff has anything to do with air consumption, being properly weighted, being on trim, unlike those teaching videos that we just saw. Those things will affect your surface air consumption, but not nitrox versus air.
But there is one gas that will affect your breathing heavily, and that is CO2.
Correct.
So if they started breathing and they were working very hard, he's going to build up a CO2 content, and that's going to make him breathe more and more. And you can get that from open circuit by over breathing it. That may have happened, but changing it to nitrox, as you just explained, wouldn't affect it.
Yeah, so if let's say if his tank lasts them 40 minutes on a regular dive, whether it was air or nitrox, it would be 40 minutes. It's not going to affect anything.
Unless he had CO2 buildup.
Right.
At depth. He'd also take a larger 15-liter tank instead of a standard 12-liter, adding another 5 kilos of additional load, but would also give him some extra time to spare.
That's not possible.
Unfortunately, between the heavier tank and the heavier weight belt, he was significantly less buoyant than he'd been in the past.
Well, let's talk about that really quick. So he said that instead of having a smaller tank, he took a bigger tank. I think in cubic feet, this is probably the difference between a 63 versus an 80. So he took an 80 instead of a 63, which is common to use in training. And doing, if you're diving in a pool or whatever, they'll probably give you a smaller tank, which is okay. But he said that it added 5 kilos. 5 kilos is 11 pounds. You're not going to add 11 pounds the water by switching from a 63 to an 80. As a matter of fact, if you have a snorkel and you're free diving and add an 80, you wouldn't add 11 pounds underwater.
Like 3 or 4 pounds negative, I think, right?
3 or 4 pounds negative.
Full, with the tank full.
With a tank full. So you're going from nothing to a full big tank, and he wouldn't be 11 pounds. So this just makes no sense.
Like dead weight in the water without his buoyancy device filled, which is something he only realized once he was in the water. But either way, shortly afterward, the divers began to descend from the boat down to 30 meters or 100 feet toward the shipwreck. As they descended, along with the light dimming above them, they could see that visibility was poor due to a recent undersea earthquake. This is when the video began to be recorded. At first, Callum was with his father, and the rest of the divers were split into 5 groups to swim around and explore. As they reached the deck of the ship, Callum and his father entered the large engine room to check out the ship's massive engine. Then they swam toward the front of the ship through the dark hallways, using their torches to light the way. Their plan was to follow the hallway all the way up to the bridge and then out to regroup and resurface. Callum's father was in front, and then Callum was close behind. Eventually, they went through a few turns, and then Callum came to the foot of a ladder. He quickly looked up to see where it went and then turned to leave to keep following his father, but as he did, his wetsuit snagged on a piece of metal. He then turned around to free himself, but as he did, accidentally managed to roll himself onto his back because of the extra weight he had on him. The way his tank and belt were positioned put his center of gravity right around his lower back, making it feel like someone was physically holding onto his hips and pulling him down. Then, instead of using the ladder to pull himself back upright, he instinctively began to kick his legs to right himself like you'd normally do during a dive. Unfortunately, in the narrow hallway, he couldn't spin himself around, and all of the kicking disturbed all the silt on the hallway floor. So realizing he was making things worse, he finally reached for the ladder and then tried to pull himself up. But again, due to his buoyancy, this didn't help at all. So finally, frustrated, he stopped for a second, sat there, and then inflated his buoyancy control device. Then he reached for the ladder again and got himself into a standing position. Up to this point, he hadn't really been worried and was more just focused on getting himself upright. But as soon as he was standing, effectively blind in the dark green silt, panic just set in out of nowhere. Immediately, he shined his light around and banged his tank against the ladder to try to make noise to signal his father, but because he also couldn't see his father's light anywhere, he realized he was probably too far to see what was happening. And even worse, even if his father was close by, in all the silt, he had no idea where to go, or even if he was facing the right direction. As he was looking around, he realized that he could just stay still and wait for the silt to dissipate, so he checked his dive watch to see how far into the dive they were. By then, they were 12 minutes in, so he had plenty of time to just sit for a minute and let visibility improve. Then he checked his pressure gauge though and realized he'd somehow already gone through over half the gas in his tank. Because he had no idea how long it would take for visibility to improve, and then how long it would take to get out of the ship and then up to the surface, he was at risk of getting dangerously low on gas.
So here's the detail that he went over that I want you to explain for everyone watching. So he said that the shipwreck was around 100 feet, so 30 meters underwater. He was diving for 12 minutes. He already went through half the tank. So somebody watching this, especially if you're a diver that, has a typical like 45 to 60-minute dive time on a single tank. How can someone go through their air so fast? So let's talk about how much air he's breathing at 33 feet or at 30 meters at 100
That's
feet.
4 times. Each breath is breathing 4 times the volume of air per breath as compared to the surface.
Why?
Because it's compressed. So imagine that pressure is compressing that air. So the molecules are compressed smaller. So you're breathing in way more per breath because it's 4 atmospheres, roughly. 99 feet is 4 atmospheres. I think you said 100.
Yeah.
Right? It's depth divided by 33 plus 1 for us imperial users.
Right.
That's 4 atmospheres, which means you're breathing the air 4 times faster. It's 1/4 the size. The air is the size as per breath as compared to what it would be on the surface.
Right.
So you are gonna suck that air down much faster. Especially now, add the fact that he's panicked, according to this. So now you're breathing faster,
Right.
and you're breathing it 4 times faster on top of that because of the compression.
That's right.
But I'm wondering why he wasn't able just to go up the ladder.
Right.
Wouldn't you feel that you're going up? You could
Right,
see
if
your
you-
bubbles. You could slowly go up. You're feeling your ears.
Well, but he
Unpressurized. So
I'm
not sure
He's diving on a hallway, according to the video. He's on a hallway. He gets to a ladder that goes up. There's not a whole lot of place to go if you're holding the ladder. If you are inverted for some reason and you start going up, but you're inverted, you're gonna hit the bottom immediately and be like, what an idiot, and turn around and start going up.
Yeah, it's just tough in a panic. It's tough to say this
Right.
stuff in a panic. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and I don't want people starting commenting like, well, that's easy for you because you're a cave diver. Like, no, I'm just saying if you're a regular diver and you're holding to a ladder and you just silted the whole place out, which happens quickly, okay? I don't care who you are. You're going to silt the whole place out.
Mm-hmm.
If you're snagged in a moment of panic and trying to ride yourself up, it's going to be silted out. Maybe if you go up and get out of the hallway, the silt's not going to follow you. Just go up a few feet, a few meters, and you should be out of the silt for the most part.
yeah, it's just tough. It's tough to criticize somebody
Yeah.
when they're in a full panic mode. And by the way, that whole compression talk is it's Boyle's law. It's basic gas
wanna look it up?
principles.
Yeah.
If you want to look it up, of just pressure and volume, it's directly out of Boyle's law. That's the dude that figured it out.
Yep.
Instead, he decided the best thing to do was to try to search for the hallway they'd been heading down and get to the bridge where his father would be waiting. Then, keeping his hand along the wall to guide himself, he started heading in the direction he thought was
Do I
right.
have a light?
This continued for what felt like forever, and during which the panic just kept getting worse and worse.
see, that's what I
And He
mean.
knew that every breath was one breath closer to suffocation, which only sped his breathing up despite his effort
Yeah,
to keep it under
That's
control.
what I was saying.
It's a vicious cycle.
Finally, though, the silt lightened, and then he cleared it and came to an opening which led outside. Then he repositioned himself and then squeezed through the opening and sort of fell through it. With everything going on, the transition into the much brighter water only further disoriented him. He then looked around and had no idea which section of the ship he was at, and because of the poor visibility, he couldn't even
up,
see
dude.
the ocean
Who
floor,
cares?
so he had no
SMB.
idea which direction was up.
Up.
Thankfully, he had the wherewithal to watch his bubbles to reorient himself,
There you go.
and then began banging his tank on the side of the wreck, hoping to attract any of the other divers.
But why? Who
Then
cares?
he waited
Go
for a
up.
moment and checked his air gauge once again and saw that he was at just a quarter of his tank left.
Just go up.
If he didn't find someone soon, he'd have to ascend alone immediately and risk being swept away in the ocean currents without someone
Fine.
to guide him.
But
When
you're
no one came
alive.
In response to the sound he was making, he started ascending up the side of the wreck until he could see he was somewhere near the bow. Then he swam down the length of the deck to the bridge to find his father, but his father was likely still waiting inside for him. He contemplated going back in again to meet up with him, but decided against it because of the possibility of getting lost again. Instead, he decided to go to the middle of the boat where the dive leader was waiting for everyone to finish. As this was going on, he knew that the amount he had left in his tank was the point where you need to ascend immediately to avoid running out. If he didn't find someone else soon, he'd have no choice but to ascend, and he didn't even know if that would be enough because he was below that point.
Oh my.
Thankfully,
goodness,
as he
what
made
is
his way to the
happening?
middle of the ship, he spotted the faintest shimmer of bubbles. He headed directly toward it and found a group of divers. At this point, the panic was enough that he was actually finding it hard to breathe through his regulator, likely because of how hard he was breathing. Somehow, though, he managed to signal to one of the divers to see their pressure gauge and saw they had over half their tank left.
I'm out of air,
Then
man.
he showed the diver his gauge and managed to communicate that he needed some of their gas. The diver understood his communication and untied their spare regulator, known as an octopus. Then Callum removed his regulator from his mouth, but cold seawater immediately flooded his mouth and nose. Closer to the surface, you can hold
clear?
air in your mouth, but that deep in the water, the pressure causes your mouth and nose to flood almost immediately, which he had no idea.
What?
This then
Okay,
forced his airways
we're going to
closed
have to
because-
pause that. I will comment. The pressure has zero to do with the water being forced into your nose or mouth. You're already underwater, right? Your nose is covered by the mask completely, unless he knocked his mask off, which I don't know. But the mouth, what we do in that case, it's a basic skill. If you take the regulator out, you should be blowing bubbles. Let's not get into that whole discussion. You should be.
Right.
You then take that buddy's alternate, you put it in your mouth. You may have a little bit of water in your mouth. You can either purge the regulator, which blows air in your mouth, blows out the water, and then begin breathing normally. Or you could blow out yourself, which clears the water out of the regulator, and then you breathe normally. Or you could just guard it with your tongue. Take a couple of breaths. A little bit of gurgling is there.
Yeah.
And then after a couple breaths, it's probably going to be gone. Now, once again, if you're in a panic mode, you may not be able to think these things out. I just want all our users to know that we practice this skill. It may be like dive 1 in a pool
I
when
think
you're in
so.
training. It's one of the
Dive 1.
earlier skills of taking the regulator out, putting it back, blow bubbles, put it back in and purge.
Yep.
I think it's dive 1, if I remember correctly.
It is dive 1, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've seen people panic over this. Like I remember we were doing a rescue class and somebody in a pool did the out of air. It's one of the skills that you practice, like rescuing somebody who's out of air. And they took the regulator, put it in their mouth, and didn't clear. They just tried to breathe in. And as soon as they did that, breathe in water,
They went up.
just like a rocket ship to the surface. So people do panic and they forget.
Yeah. The other thing, though, that is disturbing to hear, the normal procedures is you lost your buddy. He's in a lost buddy situation. You're running low on air. Look for 1 minute, literally. You have a light, make a 360. I don't see anybody, and I'm running out of air. What good can possibly happen underwater by staying there?
That's right.
Versus you're on the surface and breathing, and you may be blown away by the current. What do? You have an SMB. You certainly should not be diving in the ocean without a surface signaling device, a surface marker buoy, which you should actually fire while you're underwater before you come up.
Right.
So a boat doesn't smash into you, or they can start finding you ahead of time.
Right.
But at a minimum, when he gets to the surface and he's calm and he's relaxed, you blow it up, hold it down a little bit so it sticks straight up, and the boat can find you. That's what we would. We also practice that skill in like probably dive 3 or 4 of your open water certification. And these are why we practice
They're
it.
all basic skills because you do need them sometimes. And again, you know, that SMB is really going to help also to as an ascent line. And the worry here is that he waited so long, like looking for my dad, looking for a dive leader, trying to talk to somebody. Hey, what's up? Like, help me. What if he had to now ascend and he was down to, I mean, he said that he was struggling to breathe, which I've experienced when the pressure goes below the cracking pressure of the regulator. So
That could be.
in a regulator,
It's not balanced. It may not be balanced
depending on the brand, okay, the regulator will take pressure from the tank, which is thousands of PSI, potentially, okay, and regulate it down to a small pressure, an intermediate pressure on the first stage, and then a lower
breathing pressure.
breathing pressure on the second stage. But in order for the regulator to work properly, you need, like, depending on the brand, let's say 130 PSI. All right, some of them might work at like 155, some of them at 120, whatever. But you need something in the hundreds, okay? So if the air pressure in your tank goes below the cracking pressure of the second stage, you will struggle to breathe. You're literally sucking hard, like, because the regulator doesn't have enough to give you. So if it was that low, like 100 psi left in the tank, and that's for those of you is less than 10 bar, who know bar, from 100 feet it would have been hard to make it up all the way. Definitely no safety stop. Just blow all the way to the surface and hope for the best. So that would have been tough.
A reflex known as a laryngospasm. As you might imagine, between everything going on, this was so shocking that his mind just went blank and all he could think was air and tried to swim to the surface without a regulator in his mouth. Thankfully, as he began to kick, the other divers grabbed onto him and held him in place to keep him from ascending. Then, one of them took the octopus and tried to force it into his mouth, but because Callum was in such a panic, he thought if he opened his mouth, he'd drown. So he clenched his jaw shut and pushed the other diver's arm away. This was then followed by his diaphragm spasming as his lungs were desperately trying to breathe, and dots started to appear in his vision. Then, as if it was said by someone else, a voice in the back of his head said, "You're going to die if you don't calm down." And just like that, he snapped out of his panic, and all the sensation flooded back all over his body. He could feel how wide and dry his eyes were, and the pain in his teeth from how hard his jaw was clenched. Then he felt the cold water against his face, and closed his eyes to give himself a moment to calm down. Finally, he opened his eyes and calmly signaled the diver to pass in the regulator. Then he placed it into his mouth and let out a weak cough to clear the water from his mouth. This was then followed by the deepest shuddering breath he'd ever taken. Even the gas was cold and hurt his airways like the pain from a brain freeze. It was unlike any breath he'd taken before or since, and it was like he was breathing for the first time ever in his life.
Okay.
After that, he took some long, deep breaths while the other divers hovered around him and made sure he was okay. Then, once he was calm, they moved toward the dive line to wait for the others. While they waited, they began picking up mussels that were on the hull of the boat, cracking them open to feed the fish swimming around. Which is obviously a stark contrast to the situation he was in just moments earlier.
That's a 180.
Then, finally, his father came over, and he took a deep breath and switched to his father's spare regulator. Afterward, they ascended the line without issue and even went for a second dive later that day.
Dude.
They would even go for 2 more dives the following day, although he hasn't gone again since he got back from the trip.
Well, how do you know? I mean...
There is a video circulating around the internet that at first glance seems incredibly sweet and romantic. In the video, a man wearing blue swim shorts, a mask, and flippers can be seen swimming underwater up to a window.
Is this a new video?
He presses a piece of paper and a watertight Ziploc bag to the glass, and the woman filming begins to giggle behind the camera.
Can't hold my breath long.
What the note said was, "I can't hold my breath long enough to tell you everything I love about you, but everything I love about you, I love more every day." The woman responds with an awe and keeps giggling. Then the man turns the paper around, and on the back, he wrote, "Will you..."
Let's just make it clear. They were in like the Maldives, where they have underwater rooms, you know, like hotel rooms underwater. Yes. So he planned this thing where he's like, "All right, baby, just lay in bed or whatever. I'll be right back." And then he went and then free dove to the window, and he's holding the stuff, holding his breath. And the lady is reading it, you know, and so basically that's what's happening.
"Please be my wife. Marry me."
He proposes.
Then he reaches into his shorts pocket, takes out a case, and opens it up to show her a wedding ring. The woman then screams in joy as the man swam up and out of view of the camera, and that's where the video ends. The man in that video is Steven Weber, and the woman's name is Kenesha Antoine. This was supposed to be the most romantic moment of both their lives.
This video is legit.
But instead,
I've seen it.
It became the most tragic. The two met while Steven was DJing 2 years earlier in 2017 and quickly fell madly in love. Steven was known in Louisiana DJ circles as the real Steven, whereas Kenesha was an accomplished lawyer running her own notary and legal service. This might not seem like a good match on the surface, but in addition to their personalities just meshing well, they both had a passion for giving back to their community, Baton Rouge. So while Steven DJ'd at night, his day job was at St. Christopher's Addiction Center, where he helped people break the addiction cycle. Meanwhile, in addition to being a lawyer, Kenesha volunteered and worked with several nonprofit organizations which aimed to protect the rights of people with mental and physical disabilities. And despite living in the same spot all their lives, they also liked to travel every chance they got, exploring the world together and getting out of Louisiana. Time away from work mattered a lot to Kenesha, and there was one place she had always really wanted to go. So in 2019, with her 40th birthday just around the corner, Steven decided to book them on the trip of a lifetime to Tanzania. Steven then booked his dog into a kennel, and the two set off in early September 2019 for this magical trip. The first part was a safari vacation on the mainland. Then at the end of that, they checked into the Manta Resort on Pemba Island off the coast. And their room at the resort was nothing short of spectacular.
So awesome.
It was actually a wooden cabin floating in the ocean but anchored to the sea floor. In it, there were 3 levels. At the top was a daybed where they could bathe in the sun by day and look up at the stars at night.
Wow.
Beneath that was a lounge room with doors that could be opened completely to let the ocean in. And then the coolest part was that they could climb down 30 feet down a ladder to the stunning underwater bedroom. In it, they could watch sea life swim by through glass on all sides. Now, because of all these features, it was by far the most expensive part of the trip. Just one night at the cabin cost $1,800, but it was worth it because Stephen wanted everything to be perfect. And despite the trip being a year in the making, Stephen had managed to keep the most important part of it a secret. On the last day, in that beautiful cabin, he planned to make the trip of a lifetime even better by proposing to the love of his life. They checked in on September 19th, and the two were just blown away by the cabin. Kanisha checked around the upstairs parts, and then they both dropped into the bedroom, laughing at the fish they could see and amazed that a place like that even existed. A little later, Stephen crept up the ladder, took the wedding ring and piece of paper with the messages written on it out of their hiding place. Then he slipped on his mask and flippers and then dropped into the ocean. When Kanisha saw him in the water outside the window, she picked up her phone and began filming. After Stephen proposed, Kanisha stopped filming and then ran up the ladder to the first floor to greet her new fiancé, but Stephen didn't resurface.
Oh no.
Then she ran up to the top floor to see if he drifted out a little, but he wasn't there either. This made no sense because she'd just seen him swim up. She could basically see the surface from the point he went out of view, but there was no sign of him. Immediately, she began to scream, and then she screamed loud enough that locals and boats came over to find out what was wrong. The men in those boats dived down, desperate to find him before it was too late. And eventually, one of them did, but tragically, Stephen was already dead.
Didn't make it.
As you might imagine, this was beyond devastating for Kanisha.
Wow.
Later on Facebook, she wrote to him and said, quote, "You never got to hear my answer. Yes, yes, a million times yes.
Oh man.
We never got to embrace and celebrate the beginning of the rest of our lives together as the best day of our lives turned into the worst in the cruelest twist of fate imaginable." To this day, it remains a mystery why Stephen died.
Well, that's what I was
One
gonna
thought
ask.
is that he got so excited during the proposal that he misjudged how long he could hold his breath and
he
blacked
held it
out
too
as he
long.
swam back up.
I mean,
In
he
the
came down
aftermath,
with a
Kanisha
note,
and
and
her
she's
family
like,
left
"Hold
his
on,
page and the photos of their
That's
time
not the
together on
password.
Tanzania on Facebook as a memorial to him.
It's terrible.
let me start recording." Yeah, he just held his
If you made it
breath
this
for too
far,
long.
thanks so much for watching.
Blacked out.
I also want to give a huge shout out to Callum
Shallow
for
water
sending in his
blackout,
story and the
PO2, I
videos
don't
to go
know.
along with it.
Yeah.
Often on this channel, the people in the stories have passed away, and their thoughts and intentions can be hard to know. And I think there's something uniquely
That was
harrowing
really
about
sad.
getting a survivor's perspective.
Yeah, and I
Also, in case you were wondering, Callum didn't capture the whole incident on camera, just the moments leading up to it.
No, it's
yeah, that was the first game.
terrible.
No, it was terrible, and I've seen this video before. People have sent it to us to react to it, but there's not much to see. I mean, he swims down, he's holding this thing, and he's holding it for a long time, and I'm like, man, this guy can really hold his breath. And then you see him swim up, and then that was it. That was the end of the video. Like, of course, she's filming it, so she stops it because the proposal is over, and then she goes upstairs and
Wow.
where's the guy? Yeah, he
Just
drowned.
blacked out. Pretty rough. That's my reaction. That's I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
Her words on that email back is just so
Crushing
crushing.
on the post on Facebook. Yeah. You know, we have reacted to accidents like this in the past, of course. I remember one where you can actually see the whole incident all the way till they make it to the surface. It was a close call as well, out of air, you know, a lot of issues, and it looks very similar to the first one. So I'm going to leave it right here so you can check it out. Very unfortunate. There's a lot of videos like that online. Man, I hate it when people, you know,
Terrible.
lose their life
Sorry.
on such a tragic situation. But we'll see you on the next one.
Bye everybody. Rough.